G'day fellas, coming to you from my shed this morning. Thought I'd just do a little wrap up on some of my final thoughts on the Sabbath as I've now come to the end of my Sabbath year. So for those of you who don't know, I've taken a year where I've stopped doing some extracurricular work type activities such as gardening. I sort of every summer I do a market garden, so I stopped doing that this last year. I've reduced the amount of projects that I've been doing at home to the bare minimum repairs. So obviously if I had a leaky tap or broken something in the house, I fixed it, but I've not been doing any major renovations or things like that. Basically, I've taken a year off as much as I can in this modern day and age. Obviously, I've still worked. I have mortgages to pay and things like that. So I've continued to work. So I've come to the end of that year. 30th of May was the last day of my Sabbath year. And I thought this is a poignant time for me to give you some of my my last final thoughts on the Sabbath. I know some of you are getting a bit tired of me going on about the Sabbath, but it's been a big part of this year. It's been a very transformative part of my Christian walk and my life in general, and I've learned a lot of lessons along the way, and some really important things have come out of this whole Sabbath thing. So we'll just recap a little bit of what Sabbath is. So the Sabbath is a word that's derived from the Hebrew verb Sabbath, meaning to stop, to cease, or to keep. And Sabbath is the Hebrew noun which denotes the seventh day, or it can mean the seventh week, or the end of 7 Sabbaths, or the seventh year. So all about sevenths, and all related to stopping, ceasing. It's theologically, it's rooted in the seventh day rest of the creation narrative. So this is where Sabbath gets its basis. God stops on the seventh day of creation to rest after all that he has done, and we are given an instruction also to stop. It's the fourth commandment in the list of the 10 commandments. So it's pretty important. It's up there. God is saying, this is a big deal for me. I've included it in the basic 10 rules of our engagement in life. So it's serious. The ramifications of not doing Sabbath properly could result in death. It was a death penalty in the Old Testament law. At the very least, you would be excommunicated from society if you weren't obeying the Sabbath and doing things the way that they were meant to be. However, the Sabbath is meant to be a joy. Has been for me, should be for you. In Isaiah 58, verses 13 to 14, Isaiah says, we're supposed to have a joyful heart towards the Sabbath. And that entire chapter of Isaiah 58 is God saying to us, it's about your heart, it's about your attitude. If you do things religiously, you're not going to see the benefit. If you do things with the right heart attitude and motivation, it's not about the actual detail of what you do and you don't do. It's about doing what you do with the right heart towards God. Someone else who was doing a lot of talking on heart attitude, and that was Jesus. All of the Gospels are filled with examples of where Jesus said, look, here's the law, but the law doesn't cover it. We actually want to look at your heart. It's your motivation. It's what you do. And the Sabbath is part of that. Jesus still healed on the Sabbath. Jesus and the disciples gleaned grain as they walked through a field, therefore breaking the rule of law on the Sabbath, because you weren't supposed to harvest things on the Sabbath. But here they were grabbing some grain. And that shows us that it wasn't about the detail of the law. It's not about you can't be so many meters away from your house, or you must not do this on the Sabbath, but you can do this on the Sabbath. It's about your heart attitude. This is what Jesus was all about, telling us our hearts need to be in the right place with the Lord. So when it comes to approaching the Sabbath, a day of rest, a day off, it's about having your heart in the right place. Now for me, this has been the big transformation about my attitude towards the Sabbath. It's not about taking Sundays off or Saturdays off, depending on what your bent or belief is as far as Sabbath is concerned. It is about having a right attitude toward it. Why am I taking that day off? Well, I have found that leading up to my Sabbath year, I was tired. I'm working my full-time job. I'm doing all of these things at home or for other people, and I was exhausted. And I was exhausted because there wasn't a lot of time in my life for God. Yes, I was reading my word. Yes, I was doing some studies, but I wasn't really putting my heart into it. The Sabbath year, I've changed that attitude. It's taken a little while. Like, it took me 6 months to really get into the groove. It took me 6 months of saying to myself, got to get my heart right, got to get my focus right. Why am I doing this? How am I supposed to be doing this? What can I do? What can't I do? Talking to God. And what I found was, after 6 months of talking to God, guess what? God and I were having great conversations. I got my heart attitude right. I reached out to God. He's constantly reaching out to me. And we met in the middle. And over that 12 months, it's been transformative. I now look forward to having time off. I now look forward to spending more time with God in meditation and prayer. It's exciting. So just in reflection about how I approach the Sabbath year, leading up to me taking a year off, I was finishing up my harvest in my garden. I was finishing up selling my tomatoes and zucchinis and cucumbers and things like that I was growing to my regular customers who were coming and grabbing those things from me. And I was making preparations for the Sabbath. I had a great harvest. The word says to us that the 6th year before a Sabbath will be a great harvest, and it was for me. I don't know if I'd say that it was 2 or 3-fold, but it was certainly enough for me to go, yeah, this was a great year. I had a great year. Thank you, Lord, for your provision. Thank you for providing the rains at the right time and giving me a harvest that was good. But not only that, God had provided in other ways in my life. My career paths were all coming to a point where my wages were good, my work conditions were good, and I could actually go on this Sabbath year. I didn't prepare for any of that. That was all God's provision in my life. He was working in the background, making things happen, and I really wasn't really focusing on that happening. But God has made a provision for me to do that. He promises it in the Word, and He has delivered it in my life. Now, I didn't stop doing everything during the Sabbath year. There were still moments where I went and did little jobs for people as it was required. I still was involved in service in the church and doing other things. But I prayerfully considered saying yes to any activity. I was very cautious to take on any task because I didn't want it to interrupt on my year of rest. If I felt that it was going to be too burdensome, I said no. If I felt that it really wasn't something that was really necessary for me to be involved in, that others could do it, I said no. But if I felt that it was something for me and that God wanted me to do it and that I could be a blessing to others without being too much of a burden to myself, I said yes, and I went and did it. And some of those things have been a huge blessing back to me because I went into it with the right heart attitude. Obviously, in this last 12 months, I've drawn nearer to God. Many people have made comment that they can see that God's doing a work in me. Well, the only reason you can see that God is doing a work in me is because He is, and it's because I have really made God more of a priority in my life through the Sabbath process. So that has been exciting. That has been really important to me, and it's something that obviously I don't want to lose now. I'm in a place where, just like the verse in the hymn says, if you turn your eyes upon Jesus, the things of earth will grow strangely dim. And it's true. In the last 12 months, the strivings and chasings of this world have become more and more mental to me. Like, certainly there are things that we need to do to put a roof over our head and food on our plates, provide for our families. But beyond that, really, what are we trying to do? Do we really need the big monstrous house, or is a more simple house better? Do we really need the flash latest car, or is an older car that's reliable still fine? All of these things run around in my head all of the time. I don't want to put more burdens on myself than I absolutely need. I don't want to crowd God out of my life with the things of this world. So I'm prayerfully and carefully considering all of these things as I go forward in my life. Absolutely, positively, I will be more focused on observing a Sabbath in my life every day, every year, going forward. I'm planning that I will have another Sabbath year in, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years. Who knows? I'm not going to be religious about it. I'm going to listen to God and listen to what He's telling me. Certainly I'll be taking one day a week off, Saturday, Sunday. I'm not going to be religious about it. I'm going to prayerfully and carefully consider my week and make sure that as part of my day of rest, that I do spend a day where I stop, where I cease my activities, and where I keep God's commands. And I listen to Him and I spend time with Him, because that's what it's all about. Let's get this reset in our life, this rebalancing of our life, and this refocusing of our life. As you can see, I've got a list up here. This was a list I generated on Monday night. Tracy's added a couple of little things to it over the course of the week, but this is just a snippet of the jobs that I have around the house that I have to do. Now, I'm not going to get all of these done next week. I'm not going to explode out there and make things happen. I'm going to tackle this steady, as I need to, prayerfully and carefully considering what things I take on and what things I don't take on, because I don't want to overburden myself. So I'm really, really grateful about the position that God has put me in. So that concludes the message that I wanted to share with you all this morning. I hope you get something out of that. And I just encourage you all to consider Sabbath, not a religious activity of Sabbath, but a Sabbath that is from your heart. How do you take some rest in God? And I know there are plenty of you brothers out there who are not taking rest, who are working yourselves to the bone as you're striving to achieve something in the world. Prayerfully consider what you're doing. It may be a season for you that you have to do these things and get them out of the way. That's fine. But don't forget that when this season is over, get some rest. Take a break, spend some time with God, get yourself in the right position. God bless you guys. Go safe.